21st to order. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Let's start with the summary notes from the November 29th meeting. A motion to approve the summary notes from the November 29th. Motion by Mayor Michelle, second by Chair Wheeler. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please come by saying aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. The meeting summary from November 29th is approved. So we're now going to go to the FY22-27 6-year program status update. Yes, you are up.
Thank you very much, Mayor Wilson, members of the committee. Good evening. I just want to let you know that Tom Harrington from our consultant team is online. If there are any technical questions you'd like to ask during the course of the meeting, he is available here with us this evening virtually. At the 6-year program status right now is that let me back up. In your packet, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, in your packet, there are a couple of items that I'm not going to dwell on. We have the technical memorandum 1.5, which I'm sure you recall over the last half of last year, we spent a lot of time discussing that ultimately led to authority approval of performance measures and weights associated with those performance measures in November and December of last year. We'll be sharing that document for completeness, just staff have it as well. Perhaps more importantly, towards the end of the packet, there is a list of the projects, the eligible projects that have been submitted for consideration for the 6-year program. And there is also a map on the last page showing you the location of the 26 projects. In the electronic version of the packet, we did include what we call a 2-page summary of each project.
If I may, yeah, actually we gave link to our website where this is uploaded onto the committee website.
That's right. So I've got one single copy of the set here if you want to look at it, but if you'd like to take it, and we can get more if you need them. So that's what we've got in the packet. What you don't have in the packet is this document. The reason you don't have it is because it's blank, essentially. You have it in front of you. This is the summary of the project evaluations, which when all those white cells are completed, will represent in a single page the summary of the qualitative and quantitative evaluations that we do for each of the 26 projects. And the completed version of this page, together with the 2 pages and the map, represents what we call the public comment packet. That's what we will send to the public for their comments formally. We'll make that available on April 15th, per the action the authority took at its March meeting. The public comment period will run from April 15th to May 22nd. And during that time, we'll have an open house, which coincides with the regional joint transportation meeting hosted by VDOT on May 4th. And the authority will have its own public hearing immediately prior to your regular meeting on May 12th.
And if I could, I am trying to keep that agenda as light as possible, since we don't know how many people are going to show up in person. This will be our first public hearing since we had the inaugural, the hearing on the inaugural 6-year program. As a reminder, the town of Hillsborough did bring everyone, and it was 3 hours long. So I want to be cognizant of trying to make sure we don't have too many substantive items on your agenda. Thanks, Keith.
So just completing the timeline, following the conclusion of the public comment period on May 22nd, we'll be looking to generate staff recommendations at some point in June, probably around the time of your June authority meeting, but not for action in June, for action adoption of a program in at your July meeting, July authority meeting. For this committee, we plan to continue meeting with you monthly during this time period, but your June meeting is absolutely critical to the process of the 6-year program, because the recommendations that this committee puts forward essentially meet a requirement that we have to post the recommendations so many days before the authority can take action. So that does mean that the scheduling of that meeting is in a fairly tight window. I know Shri has been working with you to try and schedule something that works for everyone, or as many people as are needed to make a quorum.
Did anybody explain that I might have an issue being here? But we'll cross that bridge.
For June.
Yes,
Okay.
not till June, until the final meeting. When we go through.
Okay. Because I thought you had I know we talked to you about an issue in when we were doing.
It's just that one, it's one late June that has that small window.
Okay. Was that the Friday?
Yeah, that's the day you said Friday is preferred for Chair Wilson, so I checked with you all.
Got it.
I think I only heard from 2, you said you are available, yes. Chair Wheeler said you probably will not.
What did I say?
June 24th, I think you said you were available. I need to check, maybe.
I can't remember.
Maybe not.
What about June 24th?
The June meeting of this committee. It's not a Monday, it's a Friday evening, but Chair Wilson is available only on that day. And we have like 4 days within which we have to meet. After PCAC meets, but then 15 days before the authority meeting.
But I think we can work that out as we go. That's not something we have to do right here and now. So in terms of the project selection process that we follow, it's not really changed from any previous cycle of the 6-year program. We take into account, there's 4 components that we take into account. Eligibility, but that's behind us now. The projects that you see, the 26 projects are all eligible. Eligibility basically means that the project is either completely in transaction or it's some subset of a project in transaction. Otherwise, the authority is not able to use its regional revenues to fund. So eligibility is set. And then we use what we call quantitative and qualitative considerations. The quantitative is largely driven by the Code of Virginia, and there are 3 quantitative scales that we look at: congestion reduction relative to cost, long-term benefit, and the HB 599, as it was originally called, HB 599 project ratings. We now call these transaction project ratings because we do the calculation essentially from transaction. And that's where those weighted performance measures come into play in developing the transaction rating. So we get 3 different quantitative scales, and then we get a whole bunch of qualitative factors, such as whether a project is a continuation or not. Are external funds, non-MBTA funds being used for the project? What's the past performance of this project if it's a continuation project, or if it's not a continuation project, what's the past performance of the applicant in terms of moving MBTA funded projects forward? Other factors are included within that, and towards the very end of the process, when we've done all the qualitative and quantitative stuff, we then go through a further review of the package, the recommended package as a whole, to consider whether it has a good geographic and modal balance. The authority has a long history of not funding all the projects from one jurisdiction to the exclusion of the others. And similarly, it's funded a wide range of modal projects as well. Obviously, we can only fund projects that are submitted to us, so we tend to see more highway projects than not, but that's just the nature of what is submitted to us to review. Certainly in terms of what we do in our recommendation is we do look at the modal and geographic balance. I'm not going to go over those things in detail, but they'll all be captured on this chart, this larger chart with all the blank cells at the moment. One major shift that you will see at the moment, these projects are listed alphabetically by county, by city, and then by town. When we go to the public and we have the information filled in on this, we will resort this table based on the congestion reduction relative to cost rank. So the projects that have the highest congestion reduction relative to cost ratings will be at the top, and the ones with the lowest will be at the bottom, and everything else will be in order below that. And that's quite important to understand because our first cut at making recommendations will be to start at the highest ranking project by congestion reduction relative to cost and go down the list, adding cumulatively the cost of all the projects until we reach a point where we draw a line which matches the revenue that's available. We don't yet know what the revenue available is. That's subject to further authority action on the regional revenue budget, which is, as Beckman was mentioning earlier, is something we're trying to not put on your May meeting agenda and try and get it on the April meeting agenda, which I know that meeting is now being rescheduled for April 21st. So that should be behind us, well behind us by the time we make our recommendations, because we need to know how much revenue we actually have to allocate. So we'll rank this, we'll draw a line halfway down the table, say where the money would run out, but that isn't the end of the story. There will be projects above that line that we will recommend do not get funded, and there will be projects below that line that we recommend do get funded, because Virginia Code says we must give priority to projects that achieve the greatest congestion reduction relative to cost. But it does say give priority to it. It isn't a strict, non-negotiable statement. It gives the authority some latitude to maybe look at some projects that have strong attributes other than congestion reduction relative to cost. And then maybe some projects which have very high congestion reduction relative to cost that for other reasons don't lend themselves to a recommendation. One of the big differences this year or this cycle that we touched on the update 2 years ago, but we didn't make a big deal of at that time, but I think it's going to be a bigger deal this time, is the question of long-term benefit. Long-term benefit is also part of the HB 2313 legislation, which essentially says that over the long term, the 9-member jurisdictions will achieve a benefit from these funding programs that is approximately equal to the revenue that can be attributed from each jurisdiction. So if the jurisdiction has, if we're going to attribute 10% of revenue, regional revenue, to a jurisdiction, in the long term, that jurisdiction can expect in return 10% of the benefit. Virginia Code says benefit, it doesn't say dollar in, dollar out. So benefit does not equate to money necessarily, it equates to a calculation that we do, which is based upon principles that MBTA approved in December of 2014, which essentially say how long-term benefit should be calculated. not prescriptive in the sense of, here's the formula, plug the numbers in. It's more of a process that we shall follow in coming up with long-term benefits. So that's something we think will have a bigger play this time, because we fear that the disparity between some jurisdictions that are getting more than their 10%, as it were, and jurisdictions that are getting less than their 10%, as it were, if left unchecked, those things will become so extreme, it'll be very hard to bring them back into balance. We're not strive for perfect balance. That with 9-member jurisdictions, that would be impossible. But we will strive to balance out the largest variations between the benefit that's being received and the benefit that should be received based upon revenues that can be accredited to each of the 9-member jurisdictions. So we're running those numbers. We don't have any final numbers. I can't share those with you, but we will share everything with you prior to April 15th, when public comment begins, so that all authority members will see that information before the public sees it.
Can I ask a question, just kind of generally, without kind of sharing specific numbers? I mean, do you, in looking at them so far, do you recognize that we have some like significant disparities across the region, or how much do we have to fix? I guess, how big is the problem?
I wouldn't say significant. We have a general idea of who's over, who's under, pretty much on par.
Yeah.
We haven't gone to the authorities saying, hey, you need to change the principles, even though we're doing this on a more regular cycle with the update of the 6-year programs, biannual update of the 6-year program, instead of 10 years out on completed projects, because that was the situation we would to be frank, were concerned that we would have to be in a position of having to fix too much. So, and given that we do it with every funding cycle, we have a general idea, but again, we're trying to coalesce that with the revenues received, how much we've collected, make adjustments for what happened with the Metro funding bill that caused us to have to go in and make some adjustments to some of the projections and things of that nature. So I would say we're not off by a terrible amount. I do know, and I've told Katie this, Arlington is probably the one that's under, and I don't know if they think they're under as more than what we think, because again, that's where one of the localities we had to make an adjustment for with the loss of the 2 revenue streams, TOT and Grand Tour, that was diverted to Metro. We had to adjust for Alexandria as well, but by far we received more TOT from Arlington County.
And so are some years, some of the cycles easier just by nature of what you're getting submitted, smaller projects, easier to kind of say what's in and out, as opposed to kind of the Potomac Yard Metros coming in.
That gets to, we're not supposed to be dollar in, dollar out.
Yeah,
so, 50% is based on location, and then the remaining 50 is trip origin and destination. So that's part of it as well. When we asked the General Assembly, and I think Randy Minshew was one of our House members at the time, what did you mean? And he said, well, it's easier for me to tell you what we did not mean. And he said, we did not mean dollar in, dollar out. So we did the 50% location and then the trip origin destination. When we do transaction, and I'm sure we'll have it in this update, but the current transaction has this wheel, and it shows all of the trips in the region where they originate and their destination. So, and it'll be interesting to see how things have changed in this 5-year period. But a lot of trips, which is a good thing, I'm saying in the region, but like if you're Fairfax County, I don't know if they were 50-50, but then the outer areas like Prince William, more of their citizens leave the county to go to, their employers. So we look at those type of things as well.
I got you.
Now, given that we do geographic balance, and I know that I have to bring a funding program to a 17-member board of with the bulk, our elected officials, geographic balance is very, very important. Modal distribution is very, very important. And not just because you all have your constituents, but in the event we are challenged. And this is why I always talk about Ellen Posner. She's like, oh, I love the map. I love the map because she said, you know, she can defend us with that map showing that we have the geographic and modal balance.
So I won't belabor the methodologies, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the methodologies. But essentially, you know, when this is complete, it'll be multicolored and it'll be ranked, and it'll be ranked based on CRRC, but we'll also show, you know, the transaction ratings, the HP 599 ratings. Ratings and rankings, and long-term benefit, we will summarize probably rather than with a number. It'll be numbers based, but we'll probably categorize the 9-member jurisdictions into either over, under, or approximately equal, and that will suffice for our purposes for the analysis that we're doing. And then a whole load of other stuff as well, which is all numbers driven, but it's kind of a bit more qualitative in nature. That's the process that we follow, and we'll have more on this as we go through. But as I said earlier, that June meeting of this committee is really critical for the process.
Questions?
And if I could, because we do take the recommendation from this committee to the authority. Now, we do provide the authority with the recommendations of the Technical Advisory Committee, which is the citizen committee of experts that is one of your statutory committees, and the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee, which is the 14-member committee comprised of elected officials from the 9 localities and then the 5 towns with the highest population. We do take those recommendations, but we bring them to you as well. This is why the scheduling of the June meeting was a little critical, because we had to make sure that your meeting is after the meeting of those 2 committees. Now, again, we are working on the revenue projections. I have an idea, but Mike is out of town, so I don't want to get it ahead. We are looking at what's going on with the proposal to suspend the gas tax. I've been asked, does that affect the authority? Negligibly, I should say, but there is an impact. But because the bulk of our revenues is from sales tax, there won't be a huge hit in the near term. And I say that because our revenues now come from sales tax, we get some from grantors tax, we get the 20 million off the top from the state, and then we get I-81/ the interstate operations and enhancement funds money. The interstate and operation and enhancement funds and the 20 million that we received off the top from the state probably has gas tax funds associated with it. Because what happened was with the omnibus transportation bill, Commonwealth created Commonwealth transportation funds. So all of these funds, goes into this funds, and then that's how they're divvied out. Now for us, and Laura Farmer, VDOT CFO, gave a presentation to the CTV last week. We are to receive 20 point some million, I can't remember the number, from FY 2023 for the next 5 years. Fingers crossed, because they changed the I guess, apportionment to the authority. Now we receive 8.5% of the revenue. So they're expecting us to receive 20 point some odd million for the next 5 years. And then, like I said, with the off the top 20 million from the Commonwealth, it could have some gas tax revenue in that pot. But the bulk of our funding does come from sales tax. It is an impact on some of the operational money, particularly for the transit agency. That is a huge concern. And long term, what does it mean for the long term? We have heard repeatedly that there is a transportation surplus. We have a transportation windfall. There's all of this transportation money, but it will run out one day.
With the grocery tax, because that's a sales tax, does that repeal affect us?
It does not, because HB 2313 specifically excluded that we receive any of the grocery tax. So we never received grocery tax.
All right. Something to look forward to.
And again,
Or something like that.
we received $1.5 billion in requests. What I can tell you, and again, looking at some of the preliminary numbers, we won't have $1.5 billion. Someone did ask, oh, should we issue debt? It's kind of hard to make the case to issue debt when we have a significant amount of revenues in the bank. Now, they're assigned to other projects, but still we have a significant amount of revenues, and it's really difficult to make that case with the credit rating agencies at this particular time. And would like to see more of that money move a little bit. I mean, I don't want to say the only situation, but having $1 billion or so just isn't great when you want to issue debt.
All right. All right, any other questions on the 6-year plan? All right, let's go to transact.
Thank you. So actually, quite a good segue is that this 6-year program is the last 6-year program that will be based upon the projects in the current transaction plan, which was adopted by the authority in October 2017. So I'm not saying this is another factor in considering bonds, but we will have a new transaction plan at the end of this year, and the next I think 3 cycles of updates to the 6-year program will be based upon the project list that's associated with that new transaction plan. And so perhaps that's got projects that are more reflective of the region's needs and the desires of member jurisdictions. So we just as a quick reminder, we update transaction in 3 phases. Phase 1 is very much the data discovery part of this, where we're looking to get citizen inputs on transportation needs and priorities, and we do some initial analytical work. So that's phase 1. Phase 3 is where we kind of get to the formal public comment review stage before final adoption. But right now we're in phase 2. And phase 2, unlike phases 1 and 3, doesn't really have a whole lot of public-facing activity going on. It's very much within the team, basically, MBTA staff, the consultant team, and your staff are all part of that process. And we're working through a lot of analysis right now, and more to come over the next couple of months before we emerge from phase 2 into phase 3. I say all that because we didn't want to lose the momentum that we gained in phase 1 with a high degree of strong public engagement. So to kind of do our best to keep that engagement going, a couple of things. At the March Authority meeting, you've got a presentation on the Transportation Perception Survey. And something else that's ongoing at the moment is what we're calling blog posts. They're not kind of strictly blog posts in the sense that you can't react to them, at least you can't react on our website to them, although I think you can react through social media. And essentially, the blog posts kind of take a little bite-sized piece of transaction and make it into a very short story to kind of build the picture of the region and what this plan is intended to accomplish and how it's going to accomplish that. And so we've posted 2 of these blogs. We're close to posting the 3rd, and these are looking at things like the overarching process, for one thing, and how it fits with the 6-year program. And then we've looked at like growth in the region. I mean, the thing you have to kind of remember with the long-range plan is it's looking at future growth. Transportation traditionally has taken a long time to get infrastructure sorted out. You need to start decades before you think you're going to need the infrastructure in order for it to be ready by the time you do actually need it. And so growth is a very important part. And the discussion on growth is actually really interesting about how, in particular, something in the mid-20s range is the growth we're looking at for population and households between now and 2045. But job growth is in the mid-30s percent growth over that same time period, which is really interesting when you then begin to look at the future changes in travel demand and the extent to which not only is there going to be a lot more travel, potentially, depending on how people travel in a post-pandemic world, 35% more jobs means 35% more commuters potentially. And if you think things are bad, or maybe not as bad as they were 2 years ago, but getting back there, for every 3 cars you see on the road, you put on a 4th car. That's how 2045 might look and feel. Understanding growth and understanding trip patterns is kind of foundational to the long-range plan. We wanted to start to tell that story in phase 2. It'll obviously all be in the plan when we get to phase 3, but we have about 10 of these blogs planned over the next month or so. They're on the transaction website. I don't think we provided a link, but it's mbtatransaction.org is the website, or you can link to them, I think, off the authorities webpage as well. If you get a chance to take a look, be happy. Any feedback from you or your staff would be much appreciated. So that's out there, trying to keep the public interested while we wait for the results from phase 2. In terms of the actual work, a large part of transaction is actually the project list. Obviously, that's the thing which creates the eligibility for the projects that MBTA can fund with its regional revenue. So there's always a lot of interest in the project list. I would say, since the current transaction was adopted in October of 2017, which had close to 400 projects in it, a lot of those projects have not been funded, and so most of them are still there, just grandfathered straight in. But there are a number of new projects which have arisen from a revised view of the future by your staff, as projects that have manifested themselves in your comprehensive plan updates along the way. Some projects have been taken out, most often because they've actually been funded and are no longer needed. And then we're looking at what we call inside baseball top-down projects, projects that don't emerge from comprehensive plans, that nonetheless fill regional transportation needs. And that's the piece of development of the project list that we're looking to finalize actually within a few days, probably, hopefully. And so these top-down projects tend to be things like technology projects, regional bike ped type projects to some extent, although a lot of those are actually really included from the bottom-up part of the process. And kind of one major area that we've been extremely proactive on, based on feedback we've received over the years since the last transaction was adopted, and from our surveys and also from the authorities' equity core value in particular. We formed a working group specifically focused on bus rapid transit planning, comprising of all your staff, together with staff from Montgomery County, Prince George's County, DDOT, and obviously state agencies as well, representing the region, and other regional bodies. So we're quite pleased with this conversation because it truly is a regional effort to look at a potential need for a type of service that people often say they want, as an alternative to driving. But it doesn't exist today. So there are a lot of transit agencies in the region that do a fine job, but a lot of times the transit agencies are focused on their jurisdiction and travel within their jurisdiction, and to a lesser extent across jurisdictional boundaries. It's not, yes.
Did you say that was within the TAC or under whose auspices was the BRT working group?
Under MBTA.
Under MBTA.
Yeah, we created that working group specifically for this piece of transaction. They've met 3 or 4 times to help us through this. But for us, a regional bus rapid transit system isn't just about routes. It's all the things that are necessary to actually make it attractive to use. So routes leads you on to discussion about frequencies, which leads on to discussion about how many vehicles are involved. When you understand how many vehicles are involved, you then need to think about maintenance and storage facilities. Electrification has become quite a hot topic. Bus priority, be that by physical infrastructure, such as we see on Metroway, Arlington, Alexandria, or technology through transit signal priority type systems. So looking at bus priority, mobility hubs, which is a bit of kind of jargon really, but it's basically looking at places where a lot of services come together and can be interlinked in a very efficient way. So all of that is kind of fallen under the bus rapid transit working group, and that in turn has led to the identification of a lot of potential projects at the regional scale that were not in transaction and wouldn't have been in transaction were we not to have created this working group. None of that is to say that any of this is a commitment to fund these things. Transaction does not commit to funding. It's a fiscally unconstrained plan. But as mentioned previously, if it's not in transaction, MBTA's regional revenues cannot be used to fund. So, as with a lot of projects that are on the transaction project list, it's the first eligibility threshold that needs to be crossed. And we didn't want things that could be needed over the next 5 or 10 years to miss out on the opportunity of funding because no one thought to put it in transaction.
Mayor.
Is this on the MBTA website? Because I've had some inquiries by residents, and I would love to be able to direct them to.
Good question. It's not there yet. It's not in a form where we're ready to post it, but it's close. And as soon as we can get it there, we will. Because that's an important part of the public comment process that we get feedback.
Is the Route 7 from Alexandria to Tyson's Corner one of the projects that's in the mix?
Yes.
And MVTC really is interested in that. And also, they're looking at studying the bus systems again in the region, so that ought to fit in with some of what you're talking about as well.
And NBC has been a member of our BRT planning working group. Obviously, we're not getting into the detail of local transit service planning because the transit agencies, obviously the first people to do that, and we do it very well. So we don't want to duplicate any efforts. It's the regional overlay that we're looking, because that actually isn't being done anyway. But yeah, we've worked closely with MBTC all the way along this process, and the Route 7 project we mentioned actually got its first round of funding from MBTA. Actually, I think the first planning study for that project was about an 800,000 allocation from MBTA. We haven't been involved since in terms of funding. Sri, my staff, has been involved in all the planning efforts along the way. And yeah, you're right, that they will have an interest in funding, whether they come to us, come to you as the member jurisdictions, along the line of routes, federal government, that remains to be seen. That's certainly qualified from an eligibility standpoint, as things can't stand.
Stay with it.
No, I usually don't say anything just for the sake of saying something, but I think it's really important to recognize that this is a really sophisticated process. Like, as opposed to other places around the entire country. And it just kudos that this is really reflects a lot of thought, input, balancing, and it's just, it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, people can sort of pick at things on the outside, but the whole process that NBTA goes through is extremely sophisticated. And kudos for having that in place as opposed to saying, oh, look, here's some measure and this is how we're going to rank projects that they might do other places. It's really impressive. So, and I know that it's gotten even more sophisticated as time has gone on. So I just want to acknowledge that because I know sometimes people like to pick apart the process if they don't get what they want, and it's really incredible. So.
And if I could, thank you, Chair Wheeler and Keith and the planning staff. We try to evolve and they bring ideas and I'm like, let's see how far we can go with it because we have to evolve. We can't be stagnant, but the planning team really works hard to make sure we're current in what we're doing, that we are keeping abreast of not only what's going on statewide, but nationally, and trying to incorporate a lot of that into our long-range transportation plan. So I really want to thank Keith and Shree, and if the other planners were here, if they're watching, thank you, because we try to do a lot with a relatively small staff.
And it's a lot of money and a lot of projects, and a lot of different moving parts that you would. I really don't just say, but it's just amazing.
No. I think we need to put that in the minutes so when we get these ranking on the Prince William project. We heard at the front end, Chair Wheeler said
I did think
it was,
about that, what I said.
she endorsed any result of this process. She knew it was perfect, thought it was wonderful. Wanted to make sure we noted that. So, Mayor Michelle.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what Chair Wheeler said, and hence the need for staff increases in the operating budget. That's proof positive.
So can I ask a question on the BRT? First of all, I love that you guys are bringing together everyone. I think you're exactly right that it needs to there needs to be kind of regional consultation as everyone kind of steps out there. And as we were one of the first in the region to get this done, and we've been talking about it for 20 years. So it's important. I guess help me understand. So like, what's the product that comes out of that? Is there going to be kind of some regional standards? This is what fare collection should look like. This is what how we should maintain rolling stock. Like, is that what the kind of thing you're expecting, or is it just more consultation?
I'm going to take the easy answer right now because I can. We'll go where the data tells us, and we don't have the data yet. In terms of what's in the transaction plan, is it too soon to talk about any future work session?
We're going to send the email tomorrow, so go ahead.
You may recall that for the transaction goals, objectives, measures, and weights, we held a work session with authority members, I think in October of last year. It was about a 3-hour afternoon for you, and we found it invaluable in briefing you on the details in a way that you could never get into at an authority meeting. But we felt that details were important to you because we're going to be asking you to make some decisions which have profound consequences, and to do that on the basis of a 15-minute briefing seems totally appropriate. So we had that work session, and subject to scheduling, we would like to hold a similar work session with authority members, possibly in the second half of May timeframe. I know this is very busy with the 6-year program stuff going on, and you've all got your cap programs and budgets to worry about as well. So we don't want to overload the calendars. We don't have a date yet, but that would be the next step. To kind of go into some detail with you on what the numbers are actually telling us, and to see, how, first of all, get your reaction on that, and to see where you want to take it. There are a number of avenues that are open, up to and including policies, regional transportation policies, certainly what if type questions, and we hope, at the most basic level, you'd ask us to explain things to you in a way that, it might take weeks to kind of plow through the numbers and interpret what the numbers mean if you will have to do that on your own. So we want to kind of shortcut that process for you, but we don't want to shortcut it in a way that we just, you just have to take it on trust that what we're telling you is right, because we hopefully it will be right, but we don't think just taking us at our word is sufficient. We need to kind of peel the onion back several layers before we get there. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I mean, we made a number of recommendations in the last transaction, or current transaction plan, that last cycle. And some of the consequences that came out of those recommendations related to technology. So, Monica created a transportation technology committee chaired by Mr. Snyder, and that in turn led, and Mayor Rochelle co-chairs that. That in turn led to a transportation technology strategic plan the authority approved last May, which itself has become integrated into the transaction process. So, I mean, that's maybe kind of recommendations that are more inward looking at what we do, but nonetheless, it stemmed from transaction and showing that technology offers some great potential for the region, but it also offered some potential challenges too. And we didn't feel that the transaction process alone could do justice to that. And so we created a new committee comprised of not just authority members, but external experts on the subject. So I think it's entirely possible that there'll be recommendations in transaction that will lead to internal and external actions. I just don't know what they are yet.
And then I just have a great piggyback off of that. When DRPT had the study looking at the Blue Line extension, Franconia, Springfield, and for us, the BRT working group was really critical because BRT can get us there a little sooner, and it can be a temporary solution or it could be a more permanent solution.
Yep.
But you can get some similar headways. Now it depends on what type of BRT.
Yep.
Some is just a signal preemption,
That's
but
right.
you're riding in through lanes, or
Right
other
away.
more like the Richmond Highway BRT that Fairfax County is doing, where they have a dedicated lane on Richmond Highway. So we're talking about those sorts of things, but I do think that it created the opportunity for us to explore how are we defining BRT, and it doesn't have to be a one size fit all throughout the region to get us where we would like to be in, number one, pulling people out of physically pulling, but getting people options to get out of their cars, but get onto a bus rapid transit that will have some headway similar to some of the commuter or heavy rail numbers that we're looking at. So we would like to have that data before you see what we're looking at, even with the this is not the current transaction 2040, which you adopted in November of 2012. We were looking at Metro Rail extensions, which is great, but Metro Rail, because it's not only Virginia, it's DC and Maryland. You cannot extend the Metro Rail system without involving DC and Maryland. And now we have the core capacity issues at Roslyn. And I know one of the outcomes of that was, can we do BRT as an interim to doing Metro Rail extensions, and something that we can realize a little sooner than extending Metro Rail.
It seems to me, if I'm right, Mr. Chair, that what's really critical is getting a handle on origin and destination trips. Where do people want to go? And then how can you avoid everybody crowding onto the same highway at the same time? Right? How can you provide options without, and just eliminating this whole fight over highways versus transit, whatever? It's about moving people. And in the context of doing it with more sensitivity to climate issues, maybe than we had 50 years ago. And of course, equity fits in as well, but you'd almost like to wipe the slate clean and say, all right, we got people who want to go here, 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 here. This is what the transportation system ought to do. For some people, it's got to be in a car. But for other people, you know, if you had micromobility, if you had this, that, the other thing, you know, it just, I'd like to get past the same old fights and sort of, for me, one of the most fundamental issues is where are people going, when, and how we can move them. And in my city, it's a problem when people drive a mile and a half to get to the grocery store. It's crazy. Why should they have to do that? So I'm not saying we're not part of the problem, but I think it's almost like a whole new way of doing it. It's like starting fresh. Like, this is where people want to go, when they want to go, why they want to go. So how do we create the system that delivers?
I mean, certainly the process does exactly do that, you know, zeroing in on a model-based analysis, because that's the way it has to be done. But using Cobb's model for the region, you know, we can understand where people are traveling from and to, and when and why. And that's foundational to long-range transportation planning. We'd like to tell that story more through these blog posts I mentioned. Yeah. You know, a lot of the commute trip destinations in Northern Virginia, I think about half of them end in Fairfax County. And within Fairfax County, about half of those end in Tysons. You know, which is great. It's got 4 metro stations there. But metro can't go everywhere, and in particular, it can't cope with either orbital or, you know, north-south movements so well when it comes to Tysons. So I'm not saying we're giving preferential treatment in the analysis to Tysons, but it's important to understand how big of a driver of travel behavior Tysons really is, not just for Fairfax County, but for Prince William, Loudoun, and your city as well. You know, it really is, you know, a real gravitational pull, which is expected to grow significantly over the life of this plan, you know, through the horizon year of 2045. Just if I made the analysis, you kind of have a basic analysis, which basic is not the right word, but a kind of a, you know, a standard analysis that will, you know, use the COG model, our more sophisticated refinement of the transportation network, which we need to do because Virginia code actually essentially, you know, requires us to be a bit more sophisticated than the COG model. The COG model can't actually be used for what we need to do for transaction and 6-year program for that matter as well. But in addition to that, the committee's been briefed on a couple of occasions about scenario analysis, we call it. Maybe better described as sensitivity analysis, where we look at alternate futures to see how much variance there might be compared to if we just went with the standardized, you know, COG model. So these scenarios will cover a post-pandemic alternate future. One that's heavily technology laden, and another which is kind of looks at takes a different take on policy with respect to incentivizing travel behaviors that the region might want to encourage, and applying principles related to pricing where, you know, the demand is such that it's overheating parts of the transportation system or certain modes at certain times of day, but to look at incentives and pricing together rather than just one or the other. And then at the end of that, we've kind of got one slot left for a 4th scenario, but we're going to wait. Actually, this committee advised us to do this, to wait to see the results of those first 3 scenarios. because they wouldn't necessarily, it's not an either or. Parts of each scenario could actually become reality, and they could certainly be tested together. And so that fourth scenario we'll look at will probably take out pieces of different pieces of these three scenarios to see how they would work together. But until we see the data, we can't really know which pieces we would take and which pieces we wouldn't take in doing that. But that's, again, all information we want to share with authority members. And obviously, we share it in depth with staff as well along the way. And that's kind of leading up to your July authority meeting, the same meeting where we anticipate you'll be adopting the 6-year program. We'll also be requesting authority approval to begin the public comment process, the formal public comment process, the phase 3 that I mentioned earlier, for transactions. So that public comment would kick off a couple of weeks after 6-year program adoption, kick off over the summer, continue into early fall. We've been looking for the authority to give us approval for a public hearing date, most likely in September of this year. So sorry, 2 public hearings this year, as well as the organizational meeting in January. So the public hearing in September and adoption of the new transaction by the end of this calendar year. And that means it'll be ready 6 months before the next call for projects, which will be based upon the project list in the newly adopted transaction by the end of this year. So for the next 3 cycles of the 6-year program, that would be the project list that determines the eligibility. Obviously, it's your choice as to what you request us to fund. We don't tell you what to submit to us to fund. There may be things in transaction that might steer that process. That's another reason for wanting to have a work session with authority members to get a sense of that. And I think that's good.
Sessions is wonderful. The last one was very productive.
Thank you. Jonathan will be sending the email out tomorrow with some dates inquiring about your availability. We will feed you. I know that works a little better when you have something to eat and you're not meeting on an empty stomach. So Jonathan is the new clerk to the board. So yes, he is. And I failed to introduce the new staff members last week, but Jonathan is the new clerk to the board. I think one of the things that was an outcome of my, compensation study is that Margaret was doing 2 jobs. Yes, so we wanted to make sure we corrected that. So Jonathan, his job is clerk to the board.
We don't want to burn people
We
out.
don't, I'm telling you, she's smiling. That has gotten a little lighter, so. But yeah, we will, so please be on the lookout for that because we want to try to solidify that.
All right. Now we're on to
So I don't really have anything else. I will note, we are working on a letter with the other regional entities in some localities in response to the governor's proposal to suspend the gas tax. And I just checked my email, Ms. Boehner sent me the latest draft and we'll review it to see if the authority wants to be a signature to it. I'm assuming we do, but I do need to talk to Chair Randall and you as well, Mr. Snyder. So we'll see how that goes because again, while we are not directly impacted, we are indirectly impacted. And one thing I will note, anytime that there are cuts and without replacement, even though we have this surplus right now, I keep saying that will not sustain for the long term. And then when we're looking at, and one thing Ms. Boehner and Amy Seifert, who's MBTC's legislative liaison, they tried to get some language in that says, hey, at year 5, can the Commonwealth reevaluate where we are with transportation revenue? I don't know if that will gain any traction, but they are trying to look at that because the issue is with this surplus, schools and other things are being filled. So they are not at a deficit, but right now, because, oh, transportation, we have all of this money, it's just a rainfall, a windfall of money, there is no filling of the transportation revenues at this time. So there are impacts. More immediate is transit and then the transit operating, but longer term, we want to know how this will impact the 6-year improvement program that the Commonwealth does, how it impacts smart scale, and then how it will impact us, because one thing we've experienced when localities and agencies are not funded through a smart scale, hey, let me try to get what I can from the authority, when we really need to be working in tandem. So we are working on that. And again, you will see an email from Jonathan tomorrow asking about your availability to have a meet, I guess, or a work session in May. We're working on the dates now, so you will see that in the email tomorrow. And lastly, just as a reminder, the April meeting has been rescheduled to April 21st. So we did send that email out this morning. And that's all I have.
Any questions from this side? Okay. All right, next meeting to be determined.
But yes, I would like to discuss that here.
Yeah, you want to discuss?
Confirm that
Determine it
date.
now. All right, let's do it.
So we have April meeting, May, and then June meetings. We need to kind of see which are your available dates. Most importantly, the June meeting, which I talked to Mayor Wilson, and your preferred date is June 24th, Friday.
I can't say it's my preferred, it's my.
Only available, I think.
It's fine available.
Only available, I think. And that's probably the time Chair Wheeler says she may not be available.
I may be out of the country. And so it was
Where are we going?
out of the country. And
If
it's
it's a
sort of
better option, I'll go there.
someplace you've been recently.
All right.
And so it actually blanketed from before to all the way past like where the window was. And so it wasn't like moving it around and that window made a difference
Okay.
to me. So, but you know, I would say there's an 80% chance of that.
What are the rules about virtual participation? I'm sure you'd love to do that.
No, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
That is an option.
okay,
But we have to have the physical quorum
Yes.
present.
We still need the physical.
that's 3.
3.
Okay.
But is there any limitation on number or?
Well, this committee is a committee of 5. Now,
Who's number 5?
Mayor Meyer. Can Chair Randall make it a committee of 6 or 7? You know, I don't want to get into that, but right now you're a committee of 5 and the quorum is, physical quorum present is 3. That's required for virtual participation.
So Mr. Snyder, if you're asking about how many times you can attend remotely, that's.
I think it's, the law says 2, but then if you're taking care of someone who's ill, or if you're ill, it's a little nuanced. But before we can even get to that, we have to make sure we have the physical quorum present.
There's a chance the law could change a couple days after this meeting.
Well, this is true.
Literally a couple days after.
This is true with the FOIA
Yeah.
council.
Yeah.
There is some verbiage to at least try to get the committee, of the committee bodies having the provision to meet virtually, even if the full body cannot. I think that's where the council may be at this time. But as of now, physical quorum present. And it's something like if you're sick, we're not asking for doctor's note. If you tell us you're sick, then you are sick.
You
And we,
better be sick, right?
and we appreciate you logging in when you're sick, so.
So what, I'm sorry, what was the initial question?
So June 24th,
June
5 p.m.
That's a Friday.
Yes.
Long do we expect that meeting to last?
As long as you are, that's where you will make, you will look at the, you will look at the staff recommendation for 6-year program, you will see what the technical advisory committee and the PCAC recommended to the authority. You will see all that, and then you make your own recommendation to the authority.
Might be out of town, but I'm not 100% sure.
So now we're getting very close to not having the physical quorum present.
And the range was what again?
23, 24, which is Thursday and Friday,
Yeah,
and then the next Monday and Tuesday. I think that is
The
27,
28th.
28. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because this actually says I'm supposed to come back the 26th. I don't remember the 27th and 28th being thrown out
27
there.
and 28, yes, those are also. Well, I think probably,
Based on your response.
Yeah.
no, based on Mayor Wilson's response, because
I got it.
he probably was available on your.
27, 28.
Okay.
I got the council.
And also, and I'm just throwing this out there, if you could, if there any daytime,
Yeah,
How about the 30th?
no, that's too far, right? That's after the
Yeah.
period. I think that's after the period.
We had to meet 15 days before the
yeah.
authority meets.
There was a law passed, a bill patroned by Delegate Lemonian about posting. So we have a window in which we need to post the recommendation before the authority takes action. And this committee is the committee that makes that recommendation.
22nd?
The second is the PCSC meeting is
Yeah,
that.
so it has to be 23rd, 24th, or it has to be Thursday to Tuesday.
Thursday through Tuesday?
Yes, somewhere in that range. That's how we end up on Friday.
I guess we didn't talk about Saturday and Sunday.
And I hope we won't talk about.
I don't even have Saturday and Sunday, so I'm gonna say, I got other things then too.
What do we know Mr. Meyer's status?
I don't know.
I'm just thinking if you need 3.
Well, I could move up on the Friday, like I could do like 3 or something like that. Does the Friday work for everybody else? Does the
I
Friday
may be
work?
out of
You may
town.
be out of town, but just that Friday or the whole period?
Got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, drive home on Monday.
Okay,
And you leave Friday morning?
Yes.
Okay.
I could do the 27th if I leave North Carolina very early and I can drive back. Arrive here.
might be able to do like a 7 o'clock on Thursday night, 23rd. Be later though,
I can do that.
5:30 event in Alexander. And then a daytime event in DC. Councilmember Stein. What says you?
Okay, my schedule changes almost daily, so it's good. Any case, as good as any other day right now.
Any day worse than any other day though, is really the question.
Yeah.
It is a really small window to try to have to fit it in. Did we have this problem last year also?
Yes.
We did, and like I said, it's really that bill that requires us to post 15 days before authority action. And we have to have a recommendation.
So the 23rd, that works for you, does it work for you?
At night,
That works.
it would have to be like 7.
That's all. How many hours will we need for this?
I hope maximum 2 at the max.
If we start at 7:30, we'll be next.
7:30, that makes it easy. Because I have to be, I have a 5:30 to 6:30 in Potomac Guard.
And I don't know, I'm sure your staff will, once we go to the TAC and PCAC, they will probably inform you, and you will probably have seen the information before we gather for the meeting. So it's really just seeing where this committee is. I always try to, if I hear of any issues or concerns, make sure we take that to the account before we get to the committee level anyway, to make sure that we have concurrence to the extent possible.
23rd, then, can you,
I'll be, if I'm away, I can just sit up in the middle of the night. 10.
Well, I'm trying to,
7:30.
for a week. It's fun. 7:30, you want to say something? All right, that
Should
works.
we write that down?
That works for me.
Well, before it gets to TAC and PCAC, there'll also be documents to look at, is that correct?
Yes,
Like
so
rankings and all the rest of it will be filled out, yes?
we will have the staff recommendation. When will we have that staff recommendation?
This sheet will be filled out in the next couple of weeks. So you will have that, but that is not the recommendation.
Right.
So that recommendation will come only, we finally take a look at all these things plus
The end of the
the public comments and
Right.
then incorporate that into our staff recommendation. That will come early June.
Or, okay.
Yeah,
I think the week of the authority meeting in June is when we're likely to have the recommendations.
Okay.
They won't be on the June authority meeting
Yeah.
agenda. But
But
that's.
they will be-
I'm thinking
that's-
about more about processing information
Yes.
while I'm away and stuff like that, and so, I mean, so.
And even before, in doing the staff recommendation, I do talk to the DOT directors and, incorporate comments, and thoughts into that as well, getting into the qualitative analysis.
I don't remember this process being that contentious last time.
I try not to make sure any issues, we try to make sure any issues are resolved before we bring them to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we would say that not everyone will agree with the recommendations, but we hope that everyone will understand the justification behind why we made them.
Right. Wasn't there some horse trading at the end and projects coming in? Very, actually passed some other, we had to sort of vote those in. Am I thinking of the same process?
Yeah, like the last time we had VRE, I guess they withdrew one of their
Right.
projects, so it freed up
So
some,
3 to 20.
it freed up some monies, and I think Falls Church and the city of Fairfax.
Yes, that's what I remember.
Yes, and again, we look at the scores, we look at the projects and things of that nature. And sometimes it's offline conversations because some projects are more ready than other projects. And just talking to your DOT directors, that gives us a good awareness, if you will, regarding project readiness.
so I had the 6:30 for 7:30 PM for that date. I would send out meeting requests. So
Did you say 23rd?
Yes.
23rd, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I thought you said 24th.
23rd.
I'm sorry, sweetie, I couldn't hear what you said.
June 23rd, 7:30 PM. That's the date we fixed, and I will send a meeting invite, so it will be in your calendar. We still need to think about April and May meetings too.
Turn to the poll for that.
I can send out a poll for that. April is usually April 25th. I was looking at the calendar, April 25th, Monday. It will be a regular towards last Monday of the month. But then in May, that will be the Memorial Day.
Wait,
So-
so in April, you're saying what?
The 25th.
25th.
I can't, that one I can't do, because I have a standing meeting that day. That I chair. So. I had us down as May 2nd. And I have a. So do we need that meeting?
That is another question I have in my mind, but I don't know.
Well,
It will be the middle of public engagement period where we wouldn't have finished public engagement, so we will not have that result to show you. That will come in.
right, we will not be seeking any actions in April or May for either transaction or the 6-year programs. There'll be more informational briefings with more substance behind them than this evening. So this evening is more about the process. The substance is close but not ready yet. So, but even then, we wouldn't be asking you to take action at those meetings. So
We wouldn't really have new information.
We'll have this filled in, and any questions on that,
We should have
that's
that.
what, that we can send out
Yeah,
separately. We don't have really need for that.
You're saying we could forego April and May.
For good April,
that's
May,
one, not
May probably we still need to meet.
Yeah.
Because that's when we will have not only this, but the public engagement.
I'm gonna pull this May 2nd thing off my That wasn't anything. I don't know how that got on there. All right, so I get rid of May 2nd. So,
May, again, since there is no action, sequencing of the tag, PCSC and PPC doesn't really matter.
Yeah, the windows are
So
larger.
if we can meet on May 23rd, Monday evening.
Right, we usually do the last Monday of the month. but you're
Yeah.
saying
Usually we
Monday
meet,
this
but
week
yeah,
is
this can be-
Memorial Day.
yeah, so I have the same
That's why-
problem. I have the same problem on May 23rd. I have the same standing meeting. That's, I have a standing meeting on that Monday of every month. Could do the 26th, it's a Thursday. What's that?
It's good for me.
Yeah, the
Okay.
26th.
There's something, there's no dot on the 26th. I don't know why, but
Yeah, it's always been baffling. You think you're missing something. Like, why is this available? I don't understand. Something's wrong.
Are we, I couldn't hear. Are we
26th.
Are we searching for a May meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, May
May
Yeah.
26th, which is a Thursday.
At 5. Councilmember Schneider, is that worse or better than a normal day for you?
That's better. Mondays, I
All right.
city council meetings.
Okay. This is May 26th. Thursday, May 26th, 5 o'clock. Will that work?
5 o'clock?
5 o'clock. Works for everyone? All right. Good. We got May figured out, we got June figured out. Chairwiller's gonna tell us about her trip, and we're gonna all tack on there. If we have the quorum there, would that be okay? Does the quorum have to be here? I mean,
That works.
I'm all about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I didn't know I had to schedule my vacation around the PPC meeting. I'll do that in the future.
I mean, just let us know. Let us know. It's not really the PPC meeting, it's kind of about us. It's really what this is about, so. It's, we just would like to go. So, all right, are we good?
Nothing in April got me.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Have a great day.
Well, thank
See
you.
y'all later.
Thanks for all the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The minutes need to say Prince William fully endorsed